Admiral Sarah Mitchell had earned her stars the hard way. 25 years of military service had taught her that respect wasn't automatically given with rank. Sometimes it had to be demanded, and sometimes it came as a complete surprise. The Pentagon conference room buzzed with low conversations as military leaders from various branches gathered for the quarterly Joint Operations briefing. Sarah entered quietly, her dress blues crisp and her bearing confident. At 47, she carried herself with the quiet authority of someone who had commanded in some of the world's most dangerous places. She chose a seat near the back, observing the room's dynamics. The usual suspects were there. Army generals with their chest full of ribbons, Air Force colonels discussing flight operations, and Marine Corps officers planning amphibious exercises. But it was the group of Navy SEALs in the corner that caught her attention. Admiral Jack Reynolds, a decorated SEAL commander with 30 years under his belt, was holding court with several younger officers. His voice carried across the room as he regaled them with stories from his latest deployment. Sarah recognized the type. A capable leader, but one who sometimes let his ego get in the way of good judgment. As she settled into her chair, Reynolds noticed her. His eyes swept over her uniform, taking in her admiral's stars with what appeared to be confusion. In his experience, most female admirals came from the surface navy or support commands, not from the sharp end of special operations. "Excuse me, Admiral," Reynolds called out, his tone friendly but with an underlying note of condescension. "I don't think we've been introduced." Jack Reynolds, SEAL Team Command. Sarah looked up from the briefing materials she'd been reviewing. "Sarah Mitchell," she replied simply, offering no additional information. Reynolds approached, his group of officers trailing behind like curious spectators. He mused, as if trying to place the name. "What's your background, Admiral? Surface warfare? Logistics?" The room had grown quieter, other conversations dying down as people sensed something brewing. Sarah remained seated, her expression calm and professional. "Something like that," she said. Reynolds chuckled, and his subordinates followed suit. "Come on, Admiral. We're all friends here. What ships did you command?" "The supply vessels do critical work, don't get me wrong." Sarah's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She'd heard variations of this conversation countless times throughout her career. The assumption that because she was a woman, she must have taken the easier path to flag rank was both predictable and irritating. "I appreciate your curiosity, Admiral Reynolds," she said, finally standing. At 5'6", she was shorter than most of the men in the room, but her presence seemed to fill the space around her. "But perhaps we should focus on the briefing." Reynolds wasn't ready to let it go. His audience was watching, and he was clearly enjoying what he perceived as a teaching moment. "Oh, come on. Don't be modest. I bet you've got some great stories from the logistics world. Different kind of warfare, right?" One of the younger SEALs, a lieutenant commander named Thompson, shifted uncomfortably. Something about Admiral Mitchell's bearing was nagging at him. The way she stood, the way her eyes constantly scanned the room, the small scar barely visible on her left temple. "Actually, sir," Thompson interjected quietly, "I think—" Reynolds waved him off. "Lieutenant Commander Thompson here just got back from Afghanistan. Real warriors, these SEALs. Not like the rest of us riding desks in comfortable offices." Sarah's eyes flashed, but her voice remained level. "Afghanistan. Interesting place. Which province?" Thompson answered before Reynolds could stop him. "Kandahar Province, ma'am. Operating out of Camp Dwyer." "Ah." Sarah nodded. "Beautiful country, despite everything. The mountains in Helmand Province are particularly striking at sunset. Did you make it that far west?" Thompson's eyes widened. "You've been to Helmand, ma'am?" Reynolds laughed loudly. "Admiral Mitchell's probably seen pictures in briefings. Very different from being there, right, Admiral?" Sarah's smile was thin but genuine as she addressed Thompson directly. "The IED patterns were particularly challenging in that region when I was there. The Taliban had started using pressure plates buried much deeper than we'd seen in other areas. Made route clearance a nightmare. The room had gone completely quiet now. Reynolds' smile was beginning to fade. As he processed what he was hearing, Thompson leaned forward. "Ma'am, when were you in Helmand?" "Several times between 2010 and 2018, Sarah replied. "Long deployments. The kind where you really get to know the terrain." Reynolds' face was reddening slightly. "Now wait just a minute. You're telling me you were deployed to Afghanistan as what? Exactly? A liaison officer?" Sarah's expression didn't change, but there was steel in her voice now. Among other things, another SEAL, Commander Roberts, who had been silent until now, suddenly spoke up. "Ma'am, excuse me, but what unit were you with?" Sarah turned to face him. Something in his tone suggested recognition dawning. "That would depend on which deployment you're asking about, Commander." Robert's face had gone pale. "Oh God, sir. Admiral, are you the Mitchell who led the raid on the compound in Musa Kuala?" The room seemed to hold its breath. Reynolds looked back and forth between his subordinates and Sarah, confusion and growing concern evident on his face. Sarah's smile was warmer now, directed at Roberts. "You did your homework, Commander." "Jesus Christ." Roberts breathed. "You're the ghost Admiral." Reynolds's jaw dropped. "The what now?" Thompson was staring at Sarah with something approaching awe. "The SEAL who disappeared for years ran deep cover operations nobody talks about." "We thought it was just stories." Sarah chuckled softly. "Stories have a way of growing in the telling." Roberts was shaking his head in amazement. "Ma'am, you were at Team 6 for 8 years. The Bin Laden raid prep team. The hostage rescue in Somalia. Half the missions we study in advanced tactics courses." Reynolds was beginning to understand that he had stepped into something much deeper than he'd realized. "Wait. You're telling me she's actually... Wait. 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 A SEAL," Thompson finished. "One of the first women to make it through Bud S. and the first to command a Team 6 squadron." Sarah's expression remained modest. "The teams have evolved considerably since my time." Roberts laughed, but it was nervous laughter. "Ma'am, your time includes some of the most classified operations of the last 2 decades. We studied your tactical innovations at the War College." Reynolds was now visibly uncomfortable, realizing the magnitude of his error. "Admiral Mitchell, I had no idea." Sarah held up a hand. "No need to apologize, Admiral Reynolds. It's not as if I wear my resume on my sleeve. But the damage was done." The young SEALs were looking at Reynolds with barely concealed disappointment. The man who had just been lecturing about real warriors had just dismissed one of the most decorated special operators of her generation. Thompson couldn't help himself. "Ma'am, is it true that you spent 18 months undercover in Pakistan?" "I couldn't possibly comment on that, Lieutenant Commander," Sarah replied, but her slight smile suggested there might be truth to the story. Reynolds was scrambling now, trying to recover some dignity. "Well, of course. Special operations. That's different from traditional naval service." Roberts cut him off, his voice incredulous. "Sir, Admiral Mitchell has more combat deployments than most of us combined. She's been shot at more than..." "Commander," Sarah interrupted gently. "That's enough." The briefing officer entered the room at that moment, saving Reynolds from further embarrassment. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're ready to begin." As everyone moved to their seats, Reynolds approached Sarah one more time. Sarah looked at him steadily. "We all make assumptions, Admiral. The key is learning from them." As the formal briefing began, Sarah noticed the young SEALs stealing glances at her throughout the presentation. She'd gone from unknown logistics officer to legendary special operator in the span of 5 minutes. But she knew that respect earned through intimidation wasn't real respect. Real respect came from consistent performance under pressure. The briefing covered standard topics: readiness reports, deployment schedules, budget concerns. But Sarah found herself thinking about the exchange that had just occurred. Reynolds wasn't a bad officer. just one who had let his preconceptions cloud his judgment. She'd seen it countless times throughout her career. When the formal presentation ended and the room began to empty, Thompson approached her hesitantly. "Admiral, could I ask you something?" "Of course. How did you do it? I mean, break through in the teams when nobody thought it was possible?" Sarah considered the question seriously. "The same way anyone succeeds in special operations, Lieutenant Commander. One mission at a time, one day at a time, and by never letting other people's limitations become your own." Thompson nodded thoughtfully. "Yes, ma'am." As he walked away, Sarah reflected on how far the military had come. When she'd started, there were no roadmaps for women in special operations. Every barrier she'd broken had been uncharted territory. But seeing young officers like Thompson, who could look past gender to see only capability, gave her hope for the future. Reynolds lingered in the room after most others had left. When he finally approached her again, his demeanor was completely different. "Admiral Mitchell, I owe you more than an apology. What I said was unprofessional and, well, just wrong." Sarah studied his face. His embarrassment seemed genuine. "Admiral Reynolds, we've all been in situations where we've had to recalibrate our assumptions. The question is, what we do next. I'd like to make it up to you. Perhaps we could discuss some joint training opportunities between your command and mine. And why?" And I would get their discreet making the state, "We're faced." End quote. Sarah raised an eyebrow. "My command?" Reynolds looked confused again. "Yes, whatever unit you're currently leading." Sarah's smile was enigmatic. She gathered her briefing materials and headed for the door. "I'm afraid that conversation will have to wait. Admiral, I have another meeting." As she left the room, Reynolds was left wondering what exactly Admiral Sarah Mitchell's current position was. He'd assumed she was between assignments or in some sort of advisory role, but something in her tone suggested he was wrong again. Standing alone in the empty conference room, Reynolds pulled out his phone and began typing a message to his aide. "Find out everything you can about Admiral Sarah Mitchell's current assignment, and do it quickly." What he would discover in the next few hours would make his earlier assumptions seem even more embarrassing than they already were. Reynolds spent the next 2 hours making discreet inquiries about Admiral Mitchell. What he discovered made his stomach drop with each new piece of information. His aide, Lieutenant Peterson, had done thorough research. "Sir, Admiral Sarah Mitchell's current assignment is, well, it's complicated." They were sitting in Reynolds' office. The door closed for privacy. Peterson had printed out several documents, most of them heavily redacted. "Just give me the basics, Peterson." "Yes, sir." "Admiral Mitchell is currently serving as the Deputy Commander of SOCOM." "Sir." Reynolds felt the blood drain from his face. "SOCOM? As in Special Operations Command?" "Yes, sir. She's second in command of all U.S. Special Operations Forces worldwide." Peterson continued reading from his notes. "She took the position 8 months ago, after serving as commander of JSOC, Joint Special Operations Command. Before that, she led SEAL Team 6 for 3 years. Reynolds rubbed his temples. It kept getting worse. "Go on." "Her military decorations include the Navy Cross, Silver Star with 2 oak leaf clusters, Bronze Star with Valor device, and 4 oak leaf clusters, Purple Heart with 2 oak leaf clusters." Peterson's voice trailed off as he realized the list was extremely long. "Just tell me about her operational background." Peterson flipped through several pages. "Sir, most of her operational history is classified above my clearance level. But from what I can piece together, she was involved in the Bin Laden operation, the rescue of Captain Phillips from Somali pirates, multiple high-value target captures in Afghanistan and Iraq, and..." He paused, double-checking his information. "At least 47 confirmed special operations missions across 6 countries. Reynolds sat back in his chair, feeling sick. "Anything else I should know?" Well, sir, there's this." Peterson handed him a newspaper clipping from the Washington Post. The headline read, First female admiral to lead elite special operations unit breaks new ground in military leadership. Rest. Our lead LOSS. The article included a photograph of Admiral Mitchell receiving her stars from the Secretary of Defense. The caption mentioned her nickname, the Ghost Admiral, so called because of her ability to operate deep undercover for extended periods without detection. Reynolds read the article with growing horror at his earlier behavior. According to the piece, Mitchell had started her career as a surface warfare officer, but had requested transfer to BUD-S training after her first deployment. She'd finished second in her class despite facing harassment and discrimination that had driven out several other candidates. Her rise through the special operations community had been meteoric. Unlike many officers who moved into administrative roles as they gained rank, Mitchell had continued to deploy and lead from the front well into her career as a senior officer. The article quoted her former commanding officer. Admiral Mitchell is the finest special operations officer I've ever served with, regardless of gender. She has an intuitive understanding of asymmetric warfare that borders on supernatural. Peterson was watching Reynolds' face as he read. Sir, there's more. She's scheduled to be the keynote speaker at the Special Operations Forces Conference next month. The topic is Adaptive Leadership in Complex Environments. Reynolds set down the newspaper. Peterson, I need you to arrange a meeting with Admiral Mitchell. Tonight, if possible. Sir, according to her schedule, she's currently in a classified briefing that won't end until 2100 hours. But I could try to do it. And Peterson? This conversation never happened. Understood, sir. Meanwhile, Admiral Mitchell was indeed in a classified briefing, but not the kind Reynolds might have imagined. She was in the secure conference room 3 floors below the Pentagon, participating in a video conference with special operations commanders around the world. The situation in East Africa is deteriorating faster than we anticipated, General Morrison, the SOCOM commander, was saying. Sarah, what are your thoughts on the extraction options? Mitchell studied the satellite imagery on her screen. The window is closing rapidly. We have maybe 72 hours before the rainy season, makes helicopter operations impossible in that region. A voice from JSOC headquarters chimed in. Ma'am, we could position a team in Djibouti and stage from there, but the flight time would leave almost no margin for error. Mitchell leaned forward. What about a halo insertion? Drop the team outside the weather pattern and let them infiltrate on foot? Too risky, came another voice from SEAL Team 4. Mitchell was quiet for a moment, her mind working through the tactical problem. This was the kind of complex, multi-dimensional challenge that had made her reputation in the special operations community. What if we don't extract them at all? She said finally. The room fell silent. General Morrison raised an eyebrow. Explain. There's no just as last. Also, the hostages are being held in a compound that's essentially a fortress. Traditional extraction puts our people at enormous risk. But what if we bring the compound to us instead? She began sketching on the digital whiteboard. Intelligence says the hostage takers are planning to move their prisoners to a second location in 4 days. That movement will require vehicles, roads, and much less defensible positions. The JSOC commander nodded slowly. An interdiction operation. Exactly. We let them come to us, hit the convoy at a choke point of our choosing, and extract the hostages from a much more favorable, tactical position. General Morrison was studying her plan. It's risky. If our intelligence is wrong about the timeline or the route, then we're no worse off than we are now, Mitchell replied. But if we're right, we turn their operational plan into our tactical advantage. The video conference continued for another hour, refining Mitchell's plan and considering contingencies. By the time it ended, they had a workable operation that would be presented to the Secretary of Defense the following morning. As Mitchell gathered her materials, General Morrison approached her. Nice work on the East Africa problem. That interdiction concept is brilliant. Thank you, sir. Sometimes, The best defense is a good offense. Morrison chuckled. Speaking of which, I heard there was an interesting encounter at the joint briefing today. C-Teen-X's. Mitchell's expression didn't change, but her eyes showed mild amusement. Word travels fast. Admiral Reynolds called my office an hour ago. He seemed quite eager to speak with you. I'm sure he was. Morrison studied her face. You know, Sarah, most people in your position would have shut down Reynolds immediately. Made him look foolish in front of his subordinates. Mitchell shook her head. That wouldn't have served any purpose except my own ego. Besides, his SEALs figured it out on their own. Sometimes the best teaching moments are the ones people discover themselves. Still, he was out of line. Yes, he was. But Admiral Reynolds isn't a bad officer. He's actually quite capable, when he's not making assumptions. And his teams respect him for good reason. Morrison nodded approvingly. This was exactly why Mitchell had risen so quickly through the ranks. Her tactical brilliance was matched by her emotional intelligence and leadership maturity. So you'll take his meeting? Of course. Assuming he's learned from today's experience. As Mitchell left the Pentagon that evening, she reflected on the day's events. The encounter with Reynolds had been unfortunate but not uncommon. Throughout her career, she'd faced skepticism, condescension, and outright hostility from colleagues who couldn't see past her gender. But she'd also worked with incredible leaders who had judged her solely on her capabilities. General Morrison was one of them. So were the SEALs who had served under her command. And the Joint Task Force commanders who had requested her for their most challenging missions. The key, she'd learned, was never to let other people's prejudices become excuses for her own limitations. When someone underestimated her, she simply worked harder to prove them wrong. When someone questioned her presence in the special operations community, she let her performance speak for itself. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Lieutenant Peterson. Admiral. Admiral. Reynolds requests a meeting at your earliest convenience to discuss potential joint operations. He asked me to emphasize that this is both professional and personal in nature. Mitchell smiled as she typed back, tomorrow, 0800 hours. Conference room C. She had a feeling that tomorrow's conversation would be very different from today's encounter. As she drove home through the Virginia countryside, Mitchell thought about the young SEALs she'd met that day. Thompson and Roberts represented the future of special operations, officers who could look beyond surface characteristics to recognize capability and experience. But Reynolds represented something else. The old guard learning to adapt to a new reality. The military was changing, slowly, but inevitably. Women were serving in combat roles, leading special operations units, and earning their place through merit rather than quotas or politics. The transition wasn't always smooth. There were still officers who resisted change. Still moments like today's briefing, where assumptions and prejudices surfaced. But each successful mission led by a woman, each barrier broken, each stereotype challenged, made it easier for the next generation. Mitchell's career had been built on being the first. First woman through Bud, S in her class. First woman to command a SEAL team. First woman to lead JSOC. First woman to serve as deputy commander of SOCOM. But she looked forward to the day when being first wouldn't be necessary anymore. Her phone rang as she pulled into her driveway. The caller ID showed General Morrison's direct line. Sarah, sorry to bother you at home, but I have news about the East Africa operation. Go ahead, sir. The Secretary approved your plan. We're green-lighting the interdiction mission. Mitchell felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with operational approval. Timeline? 72 hours. I want you to oversee the tactical planning personally. Yes, sir. And Sarah? Good work today. Both in the briefing room and in the war room. As Mitchell ended the call, she realized that tomorrow's meeting with Reynolds would have to be brief. She had a real mission to plan, real lives to save, and real enemies to defeat. That was the difference between reputation and reality. Reputation was what people thought about you, based on assumptions and stories. Reality was what you accomplished when lives were on the line and failure meant more than just embarrassment. Admiral Reynolds was about to learn the difference between the two. Admiral Reynolds arrived at Conference Room C 15 minutes early. He'd spent most of the night reading everything he could find about Admiral Mitchell's career, and what he'd discovered had left him humbled and more than a little embarrassed. Lieutenant Peterson had compiled a comprehensive brief that painted a picture of one of the most accomplished special operations officers of her generation. The more Reynolds read, the worse he felt about his behavior at the joint briefing. At exactly 0800 hours, Admiral Mitchell entered the room. She was dressed in her working uniform, and Reynolds noticed she moved with the fluid economy of motion that marked experienced operators. How had he missed that yesterday? "Admiral Reynolds," she said, extending her hand. "Thank you for requesting this meeting." "Admiral Mitchell, thank you for agreeing to see me." Reynolds shook her hand, noting her firm grip and the small calluses that spoke of recent weapons training. "I wanted to apologize again for yesterday, and to discuss something else that I think might interest you." Mitchell took a seat across from him. Reynolds had prepared extensively for this conversation, but now found himself struggling with where to begin. "First, I need to be completely honest about why I behaved the way I did yesterday." Mitchell nodded but remained silent. "I've been in the teams for 30 years, Reynolds continued. "I've served with some incredible warriors, led some outstanding operations, and I thought I knew what a special operations officer looked like." He paused. "I was wrong. Admiral Reynolds, please, let me finish." Reynolds leaned forward. "I read your operational files last night. The parts that weren't classified. Anyway, I also spoke with some colleagues who've worked with you." Mitchell's expression remained neutral, but she was listening intently. "Commander Phillips, the captain you helped rescue from the Somali pirates, he told me something that stuck with me. He said you were the calmest person on the ship during the entire crisis. While everyone else was running on adrenaline, you were thinking 3 steps ahead." Reynolds pulled out a folder. "I also spoke with Colonel Martinez from JSOC. He said the hostage rescue mission in Syria 2 years ago only succeeded because of tactical modifications you made to the plan 30 minutes before execution." "Colonel Martinez is being generous," Mitchell replied. "That was a team effort. He said you identified a flaw in the approach route that could have gotten the entire team killed. And you did it by remembering details about the compound layout that everyone else had missed." Mitchell shrugged slightly. "Attention to detail is part of the job." Reynolds shook his head. "No, Admiral. What you did goes beyond attention to detail. Colonel Martinez said you have an intuitive understanding of complex tactical environments that he's never seen before." "Where are you going with this, Admiral Reynolds?" Reynolds opened his folder. "I want to propose a joint training exercise between your command and mine. Something that would benefit both of our teams." Mitchell raised an eyebrow. "What kind of exercise?" "A multi-domain operation. Something that combines traditional SEAL capabilities with the kind of strategic planning that SOCOM specializes in." Reynolds pulled out several documents. "I've been thinking about this since yesterday, and I believe our teams could learn a tremendous amount from working together." Mitchell reviewed the documents Reynolds had prepared. His proposal was actually quite sophisticated, calling for a complex scenario that would test both tactical execution and strategic coordination. "This is interesting work," she said after several minutes. "But I have to ask, is this driven by genuine operational need, or are you trying to make amends for yesterday?" Reynolds met her eyes directly. "Both, honestly. I owe you an apology, and I want to make things right. But this proposal isn't charity, Admiral. Your reputation in the special operations community is extraordinary. Working with you would benefit my teams regardless of yesterday's incident." Mitchell continued studying the proposal. The scenario Reynolds had developed would indeed provide valuable training for both commands. But more importantly, it showed that he'd done his homework and was approaching this as a professional opportunity rather than just an attempt to repair his damaged ego. "There's something else," Reynolds said. I spoke with Lieutenant Commander Thompson and Commander Roberts after yesterday's briefing. They're both eager to work with you on advanced tactical planning. Thompson specifically asked if he could be assigned to any joint operations. Mitchell smiled slightly. They're good officers. They are. And they represent the future of the teams. They don't see gender when they look at you, Admiral. They see capability and experience. That's as it should be. Reynolds nodded. It is. And officers like me need to catch up to that reality. Mitchell's phone vibrated with an incoming message. She glanced at it quickly, then looked back at Reynolds. Admiral, I appreciate your proposal, and I think there's merit in joint training exercises. But I have to tell you something that might affect your planning. What's that? I've just been given operational command of a classified mission that launches in 48 hours. It's going to require significant resources from SOCOM, and depending on how it goes, it might be several weeks before I can commit to training exercises. Reynolds' expression sharpened. Despite his embarrassment over yesterday's incident, he was still a seasoned special operations officer. Is there anything my teams can contribute to the mission? Mitchell studied his face, gauging his sincerity. It's an interdiction operation in East Africa. High risk, time-sensitive, with minimal backup options. What do you need? Fast boats and underwater demolition capabilities. The target convoy will be crossing a bridge over a river gorge. We need to be able to disable the bridge after the convoy is on it, then extract hostages from vehicles that may be partially submerged. Reynolds was already thinking tactically. How many hostiles? Estimated 15 to 20, but they'll be in a defensive position with limited escape routes if we do this right. And if we do it wrong, then we lose the hostages and probably most of the rescue team. Reynolds leaned back in his chair. Admiral, I'd like to volunteer my best underwater demolition team for this mission. Mitchell shook her head. This isn't about making amends for yesterday, Admiral. This is a real operation with real consequences. I understand that completely. And I'm not offering my teams as some kind of gesture. I'm offering them because they're the best at what they do. And if you're planning an underwater demolition operation, you need the best. Mitchell's phone rang. She glanced at the caller ID. General Morrison. Excuse me, she said, answering the call. Yes, sir. Understood. No, I think we can make that work. Yes, sir. I'll be there in 30 minutes. She ended the call and looked at Reynolds. The timeline just accelerated. We launch in 36 hours instead of 48. Reynolds stood up. Admiral, my offer stands. Master Chief Patterson's team has been training specifically for underwater bridge demolitions. They're ready to deploy immediately. Mitchell studied him for a long moment. This mission could go very wrong very quickly. Are you sure you want your people involved? Trime. Admiral, yesterday I made assumptions about your capabilities based on prejudice and ignorance. Today, I'm making a professional assessment based on operational need. Your mission requires specific skills that my teams possess. Gender politics have nothing to do with it. Mitchell gathered her materials. All right. Admiral Reynolds, have Master Chief Patterson and his team report to SOCOM headquarters at 1,400 hours for mission briefing. They'll be working directly under my tactical command. Reynolds nodded. They'll be there. As they prepared to leave the conference room, Reynolds spoke again. Admiral, there's one more thing. Yes? When this mission is over, assuming we all come back in one piece, I'd like to restart the conversation about joint training exercises. Not as an apology, but as a genuine operational partnership. Mitchell smiled. I'd like that, Admiral Reynolds. 24 hours later, Admiral Mitchell was in the command center at SOCOM headquarters, overseeing the final preparations for Operation Crossroads. Master Chief Patterson and his underwater demolition team had integrated seamlessly into her tactical plan, bringing expertise that had already improved several aspects of the mission. Reynolds was there too, serving as liaison between his teams and Mitchell's command structure. He'd proven to be an excellent tactical sounding board, offering insights that came from 3 decades of special operations experience. Weather window is optimal. reported the mission meteorologist. Visibility good, wind minimal, water temperature within acceptable parameters. Mitchell nodded. Intelligence update? Convoy departed the compound 2 hours ago, right on schedule. They're following the predicted route toward the bridge. Patterson approached the command table. Ma'am, my team is in position. Bridge charges are set and ready for remote detonation. Underwater recovery equipment is staged and tested. Extraction teams, standing by at both primary and alternate recovery points. Mitchell studied the tactical display showing the convoy's progress. Everything was going according to plan, but she knew that was when missions were most likely to go wrong. Reynolds joined her at the display. Your interdiction concept was brilliant, turning their movement plan into our tactical advantage. We'll see if it works, Mitchell replied. The best plans don't survive contact with the enemy. True, but the best planners adapt when they don't. 20 minutes later, Mitchell gave the order. All units, this is command. Execute, execute, execute. The mission unfolded exactly as planned. The convoy was caught on the bridge, the structure was disabled at precisely the right moment, and Patterson's underwater team executed a flawless hostage recovery operation. Within 40 minutes, all hostages were safe, and the entire rescue team was en route to the extraction point. In the command center, General Morrison clapped Mitchell on the shoulder. Outstanding work, Sarah. Textbook special operations. Reynolds approached them both. Admiral Mitchell, that was one of the finest tactical operations I've ever witnessed. Your team's coordination was flawless. Mitchell smiled tiredly. It was a team effort, Admiral. Master Chief Patterson's underwater work made the difference between success and failure. Speaking of which, Reynolds said, I believe we have a conversation to restart about joint training exercises. 3 weeks later, Admiral Mitchell found herself back in the Pentagon briefing room where everything had started. But this time, she was the presenter, giving a lessons-learned briefing on Operation Crossroads to senior commanders from all branches. Admiral Reynolds was in the audience, along with Thompson, Roberts, and several other SEAL officers. When Mitchell finished her presentation, Reynolds stood up. Admiral Mitchell, I have a question about inter-service cooperation. Mitchell smiled. Yes, Admiral Reynolds. Based on the success of Operation Crossroads, would you recommend expanded joint training between SOCOM and individual SEAL teams? I would, Admiral. The integration of specialized capabilities across commands proved extremely valuable. Reynolds nodded. In that case, I'd like to formally propose establishing a permanent joint training program between our commands. General Morrison, who was observing from the back of the room, spoke up. That's an excellent suggestion, Admiral Reynolds. Admiral Mitchell, would you be willing to head up such a program? Mitchell looked around the room, seeing faces that reflected respect earned through performance, rather than granted through assumption. I'd be honored to, General. As the briefing ended and officers filed out, Thompson approached Mitchell one last time. Admiral, that was an incredible presentation. The way you coordinated all those moving parts. Thank you, Lieutenant Commander. Are you interested in advanced tactical planning? Thompson's eyes lit up. Yes, ma'am. Very much so. Good. Report to my office Monday morning. We're going to design the curriculum for Admiral Reynolds' Joint Training Program. As Mitchell left the Pentagon that evening, she reflected on how much had changed in just 3 weeks. A chance encounter based on prejudice and assumption had evolved into a genuine operational partnership that would benefit both commands for years to come. Admiral Reynolds had learned that capability comes in many forms, and that his preconceptions had nearly cost him the chance to work with one of the finest tactical minds in the military. But more importantly, the young officers like Thompson and Roberts had seen that leadership and excellence weren't defined by gender or background, but by performance under pressure and the ability to adapt to changing circumstances. As she drove home, Mitchell's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Admiral, this is Master Chief Patterson. Just wanted to say thank you for letting us be part of something special. That was the finest operation I've been part of in 20 years. Looking forward to working with you again. Mitchell smiled and typed back. Thank you, Master Chief. Outstanding work in East Africa. See you Monday for planning sessions. The future of special operations wasn't just about new technology or changing tactics. It was about breaking down barriers, challenging assumptions, and building teams based on capability rather than preconceptions. Admiral Sarah Mitchell had spent her career proving that point, one mission at a time. And now, with the support of officers like Reynolds and the enthusiasm of the next generation like Thompson, that future looked brighter than ever.